Hey everyone, hope everybody's doing well. About to get started today, and is part one of the neurology and the neurobiology of addiction, right? So it's going to be broken into two parts because it's pretty long, and I'm trying to keep this short. So let's just jump in and get started with this. So again, my contact info, if you're watching this somewhere else, nfnlp.com, drwillhorton.com, Instagram. I keep got to change that. It says Twitter, now it's X. I also have TikTok, even though it looks like that may go away in a few days. But let's just jump in and get started. So as always, I always say start the class. Can you enjoy today's class? Can you learn anything new? Can you relearn old things in a new way, especially about addictions? How can you use this info? How can you be surprised and delighted? And how can you be of service? So anyway, is addiction a disease? It's rated as a disease by the American Medical Association, British Medical Association, I think just about everyone. But for something to be a disease, there has to be a defect in the physical system that causes the symptoms, right? So there's a cause, could be whatever the cause is, causes a defect, could be an injury, could be a viral thing, could be anything, but then it causes symptoms, right? That's so we know something is a disease, and it happens usually in a specific organ. You know, if you have diabetes, it's your pancreas, and then it could be your kidneys begin to shut down. That's the defect, and then we see the symptoms. But with addiction, we see the symptoms more than anything. So alcoholism and addiction is a brain-based disease, right? It's the organ involved is the brain, right? But there's no real good test. There's more and more coming on. Now we know with MRIs and things. But people with something wrong with their brain start out at a disadvantage. It's why we treat mental illness, because they may look okay, but we don't see the damaged brain, right? But it's more likely these things would be labeled as badness, moral weakness, conscious behavior choice, things like that. And really what happens is, for many years, we thought that addiction lied in the prefrontal cortex, the frontal cortex, because this is our human self. This is our personality, love, morality, decency, willpower, right? It confers meaning on the world, right? So therefore, we thought, well, addiction is that part of your brain, right? But it's not, right? The midbrain is the survival brain, the deep part of your brain, the hindbrain and the midbrain. It's not conscious, it's beyond subconscious. It acts immediately, no future planning or assessment of long-term consequences. It kicks in when there's a life or death situation going on, right? It's like you could be a little bit hungry and your prefrontal cortex will start thinking about, well, it'd be good to eat this, this, and this. But if it gets to the level where your midbrain lights up, you feel like you're starving, it's life or death, you'll eat anything. Your diet will go away. It's why people start a diet, they do well, as long as they don't get too hungry, right? So the midbrain, or the limbic brain, is the survival brain. It basically handles three things: to eat, to keep you alive, eat and drink water; to kill or fight, right? Fight or flight, to survive. And it also is part of your brain when it kicks in for procreation. Basically what our brains does. But our prefrontal cortex, when it's online, it can moderate these things, right? So alcohol and drugs work in the midbrain. They do deaden the prefrontal cortex, but it lights up the midbrain, right? And it's the survival mechanism. It's unconscious. There's no free will in the midbrain, right? And so what happens if you have this defect in the way your brain's working, not everyone has, which we'll get to, is it hijacks the survival hierarchy. So your brain confuses what's real or not real when it comes to survival. And the drugs are so powerful, and alcohol, it replaces and moves into the number one slot of survival. You feel like you need that drink or that drug so bad that you're going to die if you don't get it, right? And then it'll also tamp down you won't eat, you won't fight or flee a bad situation. You won't even have any interest in procreation, right? And this is basically what happens, right? And so here's how we know it's really different than what most people think. If you put a PET scan or a deep MRI, let's say you take two people, right? And they drink too much, right? So they have substance abuse disorder, I guess. But are they alcoholic? Do they have dependency? Well, here's the marker that would say the difference. You put the people in an MRI and you say, think about your favorite drink, whether it's a beer, wine, whatever it is, right? For most of the people, their prefrontal cortex lights up and they think about it. Oh, yeah, I'd like a good cold beer right now. This would be good. That would be good. But they will also think through it a little bit, thinking like, oh, it's too early in the day. I got something to do, or I have to go to a soccer game tonight or a parent-teacher conference. So you'll think about it and then you won't do it. Not that you don't think about it, but you won't do it. But some of the other people, what happens is if you have the alcoholic, the dependency factor going on, the prefrontal cortex goes dark when they think about the drink, and their midbrain lights up and they go into survival mode. They want it, they need it, they become compulsed. They need it so badly, right? It has to do with these dopamine receptors in the brain, right? They light up differently, right? And alcoholism and addiction is a disorder of the brain's reward system, right? It's a broken pleasure thing in the head, right? So rather than thinking I need a good meal and a good night's sleep, you think I just need a drink. And then once you start thinking about the drink, if you have the addiction mechanism going on, if you're one of the smaller percentage of the population, that defect leads to compulsion and obsession, right? So it's something to think about, right? And what happens is the addiction neurotransmitter, there's two main ones involved with the addiction side of it. Number one is dopamine, right? They release dopamine, right? They cause your brain to release massive amounts of dopamine. If having a good meal or having sex releases this much dopamine, alcohol and drugs release this much dopamine, right? So you get a massive dose of it, and it's at the heart of reinforcing experiences. And it also is the neurochemical that signals survival, right? Right? And it also has what they call a prediction error. Tells the brain this will be better than expected, so that you want it. And what happens is there's so much dopamine released, things that normally should cause pleasure, good meal, a family event, a romantic evening should cause pleasure. It doesn't release enough to match what the drugs or the alcohol is doing, right? And so it means you need more dopamine to feel normal pleasure. And that's why when someone first stops drinking, let's say, and they go to an event and their family or friends are saying, wasn't that fun? It was great. And you're like, it was boring as shit, right? Well, they're a non-drug abuser. They were experiencing the dopamine at the football game or the family outing and you're like, it didn't even hit the metric, right? And so what happens, it sets the threshold so high, you're always bored, which again, your brain goes in and you have what they call pleasure deafness. Things that usually bring pleasure don't bring you the pleasure anymore, right? And it can take up to 6 to 18 months for your brain to reset. It's why when people first stop drinking or drugging, they say everything's boring. Nothing brings pleasure anymore, right? And then The second neurotransmitter involved that people would have this defect is it's called glutamate, which is the most abundant neurochemical in the brain, and it is critical in memory formation and consolidation. If you have a glutamate deficit, your memory doesn't work right, right? And what they do, because it helps with memory, it really it accents and increases the pleasure memories associated with the drugs or the drinking, right? And it'll remember the people, places, and things which set it off. That's why they always say in recovery, you need new people, places, and things. If you get around the old people, places, and things, the glutamate releases the memories, and then your brain craves dopamine, and it knows the easiest way to get it is the drink or the drug, right? And it can initiate drug seeking, alcohol seeking, or whatever the addiction is, behavior. And this is why a couple things that are known to evoke relapse in humans is brief exposure to any abusable drug or compulsive behavior, right? Because it has to do with the dopamine release and the regulation going on in the brain. So stress also will evoke relapse in people because, again, the brain's been compromised, the dopamine and the glutamate, right? And of course, exposure to drug cues, people, places, and things, right? Again, it'll speed up what you think you need. So it's in the brain, right? Now that the midbrain has found what it needs to secure survival, how does it motivate a normal, healthy person to do behaviors that are counterproductive, right? How does it get the successful businessman that's gotten a DUI to keep drinking and driving? How does it get the person that graduates with honors, blow every job opportunity, right? Well, what happens is if they have this defect in their brain, it's the concept of craving. Again, once they start thinking about it, something sets it off. It increases the stress, and you need more dopamine because the midbrain, once this craving kicks in, that's where people call it dope sick, and with certain drugs, right? You won't die from withdrawals, even heroin withdrawal. In fact, more people die from alcohol withdrawal than anything else, right? But you feel like you're dying, right? I just was reading a thing where a doctor posted, they couldn't figure out why this person was having horrible migraine headaches to the point nothing would help, right? And it took them a while to figure out because the person had like a flu, and then they started getting these migraines. The person thought they were dying, right? And it took them a while to figure out that this person used to drink like massive amounts of caffeine, right? A couple cups of coffee in the morning with a couple of energy drinks, then throughout the day. But when they got sick, they quit drinking all coffee and the energy drinks. And the symptoms, the sweating, the stomach cramps, the massive headache, the person couldn't put it together. And they figured out what it was, is their brain was craving the caffeine, which also stimulates dopamine, right? And a person, if you have this in your brain, there is no choice. You can't say, well, don't think about it, it's not going to work, right? No person can choose if they're going to have cravings or not, right? And you don't actually have to have the drug use for the defective physiology, right? So that's why you can be sober 6 months or a year, and then you get the right cues. Something happens, you run into people, places, and things. That's what happens. I see it in recovery. People who have 6 months or a year sober, they think, I'm going to go back to the bar I used to drink at, just see how everybody's doing. Now they haven't had the drink, and then they walk in and suddenly they're craving. So once craving sets in, how does it control behavior, right? Well, the midbrain hijacks the abilities of the frontal cortex. the brain will utilize the most likely reasoning to get the addict or the alcoholic to feel like they have to use physical pain, anxiety. Oh my God, I'm going to die. I'm having a heart attack. Stress. Oh, this is never going to work, right? So it shuts down the prefrontal cortex and will bring up memories, right? Of times that the alcohol or the drugs worked, right? It's like they'll think about the one time they had fun, right? And so what happens, there'll be a reason that it'll justify behaviors like lying, manipulating, reasoning, making excuses, rationalization. I'm only going to have one. This time I'm only going to have one. Justification, well, I have to do this because you did that. So all we see from the outside are the symptoms. This person's lying, manipulating, reasoning. We don't see what's going on in their brain, right? And so next time we're going to talk about what treatment's supposed to do beyond detox, right? Because again, all we see is the symptoms, right? So this is part one. So again, think about, it's a brain-based issue and it kicks in the compulsion mechanism, right? And once that's activated, if the person has it, and again, not everybody that might have a substance abuse disorder, they drink too much, right? Maybe they're, as go back now and look at the things on levels part one and part two, and it begins to make sense from this viewpoint. So that's just a little bit on the excuse me, the neurobiology of addiction. It's why, up until 25 years ago, when they started figuring out and they could map the brain better, they didn't know any of this, and to this day, we have people say it's just a moral weakness. It's a psychological weakness, but it's not. It's like telling a person with diabetes, well, you should be able to eat cake, right? No, their body's different, their pancreas and the breakdowns, things like that. So I look forward to this. Now on Wednesday, we're going to do part two, where we get into treatments. So hope everybody's enjoying this, and I'll see you soon.